I don't have it with me. Okay, we're live. That's it. That was it. Guys, we're live now. So, hey everyone, we are live, and today, what are we talking about today? We are talking about empowering Black families and college admissions. It took me a second, it's a Monday, to really run this back and remember why we are here. So I pulled, it says Enrollment Pro. I pulled some of the most, for me, people I look to and I get advice from in college admissions and I know are headed in the right direction and won't sell our children down a creek just for a name brand. So let's start with you, Brandon. Tell us about yourself. Tell us why you're here and tell us, what's something that you're holding on to in these moments today as we, get closer.
Awesome. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Hey, don't know what time zone you in, but just happy that you're here. My name is Brandon Mack, pronouns he, him, his. I am the founder and owner of B.Mack Strategies. I've been in the game of college admissions for 15 years. Most of it was at my alma mater, Rice University. Started as an admission officer, worked my way up to be an associate director of admission. But I realized that my biggest thing is that I want to help students and families directly with this process. So left that and have been working with students and families independently now for the last 2 years. In terms of what's holding me on, honestly, the biggest thing that's holding me on is my nieces and nephews. I have a niece who is 7 all the way down to my youngest who is 2, and that's my nephew, and then have 4 in between those ages. And when I tell you, just seeing them just be happy, I mean, the thing that my nieces and nephews love is the fact that I have hardwood floors so they can just make noise whenever they come in and just stomp around. And I'm like, yeah, y'all do y'all. I'm like, please just do y'all for a moment. That is what's holding me on right now. And that's also what holds me on in this business is the fact that we have a right to be and breathe wherever we are. And that's a good bit of what we do. It's just making sure that we help our students and our families get to where it is, where you're going to be and breathe and it not be at your expense financially, emotionally, or in any other way.
Okay. All right. Alicia, that's a hard act to follow, but Alicia, bring it home.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Alicia Oglesby. I am Associate Director of College Counseling at a private independent school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I've been college counseling and high school counseling for the past 10 years. And it is my life's joy. I feel really blessed to be able to do work every day that I truly believe in. Even when higher education gets a little wacky and a little wild, the students are a constant for me. So I would say that the students are what I hold on to. So I cycle through each calendar year per grade. So what I mean by that is I spend a full calendar year with the 11th grade as they become 12th graders, finish applying or get through part of the college application season, and then I start with 11th graders again. So I just finished a calendar year with the class of 2025, and today I actually started with my work with the class of 2026. So that's what keeps me going. They are a bright light in a usually cloudy Pittsburgh day.
Okay, thank you. And Sean, is that Jimi Hendrix behind you?
You damn right.
Sean, the College Admissions and Enrollment Pro. I just found out this week that your school, SMU, actually is good at football.
Surprise. We back. What did Sha'Carri Richardson say? She said, I'm not back, I'm better. That's the ponies right there. Go Mustangs.
Yeah.
Pony
okay.
up right there. Yes.
I thought that was TCU too.
Yeah, don't go too far down. We don't want to talk about that.
Okay. What are you holding on to besides the Kendrick album? Because you and I talk about Kendrick all day, every day. And those moments of joy in the beat. Yeah. What are you holding on to? And what keeps you going in this particular moment?
If I'm able to borrow from Brandon, I think it is my kids and the grounding that comes at home. I have to start with the last time I did a podcast, I forgot to reference my wife. And so I'm going to do that at the start. Okay. And she's probably standing on the other side of this door. All right. So we are all witness. But it is my wife who is absolutely the rock, and keeping things steady in my heart, and doing things and keeping me accountable. And then into my kids, watching them grow and develop in fun and unique ways that I see myself in, and I see a lot of the students I serve in, is great because it keeps this joviality as I begin and continue to work. Like Alicia said, it's can be a slog, and it's like it's gray and gloomy come these November, December months. When you're waiting on decisions if you're a student, or you're reading files if you're higher ed, or you're just wrapped up in trying to get the cramp out of your hand from writing essays and or revising them, rec letters. I really think it is hearing my kids sit there singing, it's not enough, or turn the TV off, or yelling mustard multiple times, because that's what our house is like, that really, really have me hanging on to the excitement of each day.
All right. And I am Jenn. I go by Jenn the Tutor, or Miss Jenn. If you are a student, it's always awkward to me when students call me like Jenn or Jennifer, because I'm like, that's my friends. But I think for me, what kept me going this year is actually a year where my cousins are applying. So I have a cousin that's applying, and I also have a student that I've been working with since she was in 3rd grade applying. So that's a big year. My background, just like really quickly before we get into the topic, I'm going to tell a random story that's not so random, but my mother was followed around by her counselor in high school. She was in a segregated school because she was a little bit older when she had us. And she was followed around by Mr. Scott, who told her that she needed to go to college. And she ended up going to college, and she went to South Carolina State and got arrested during the movement, but neither here nor there. Her and James Clyburn have shared their jail stories from that time and period. But the thing that is really special to me is my mother's sister moved to New Jersey to make sure that she could afford her room and board. And so she would send her money. And now I am taking care of her granddaughter this year for college admissions. So this is kind of a pivotal year for me. It's like everything's been working up to it. And I don't think I even recognized that was what was at play in the background until this year. But let's talk about our friends at the Supreme Court, shall we? Sean, today I texted you. I don't know if you remember that. And I said, what is the difference? Because everybody assumes that this case is about affirmative action. And it's technically about race-conscious admissions. And I think I said, tell people in the fancy way and then in the barbershop way what happened in this case. Give us a rundown. This is kind of like a cold call from law school. So, Mr. Whitten, please stand up on the case and tell the parents out there how this race-conscious or affirmative action impacts them.
Yeah. I'm so glad that I got this question. I don't know that the doctors in this group would not be able to answer this question, but we'll get into that later, Dr. Oglesby. Yeah, so affirmative action is the legal precedent, right? So the fancy way to put this is it's the legal precedent for trying to, or America's way of trying to make up for its historical wrongdoings as it related to historically excluded communities. The race-conscious admissions, on the other hand, is more so the idea that there's a promotion and an empowerment that comes in the higher education arena, sphere, that would use race as a factor, not the factor, in the admissions process. And as we know historically, and or you're learning now, higher education has not always been inclusion as a part of it. And so I know, shocker, right? But it's one of these things where with race conscious admissions, it is doing some of the actions in that definition of affirmative action, but it's trying to right the wrong within a specific sphere or an arena, higher education specifically. I would turn to Brandon or Alicia if y'all have a better definition.
I'm going to barbershop this a little bit. Basically, what it is this. If we didn't have anything intentional to stop America from Americaing, that's basically what happened. Okay? Because we know when this country was set up for pale, male, and stale. Old white men, period. So basically, if we did not do anything intentional to stop that, colleges and universities would continue to be the bastions for rich, white, privilege. That's it. That's what affirmative action basically did, was basically be like, look, we know that if we left you to your devices, you would just keep this train going. And we finally had to put some things in to make sure and ensure that, guess what? You can actually be affirmative, meaning that you find value. You're going to intentionally make this decision. Now, here's the other thing that I just want to barbershop this about. Many people think that because of that, we lowered standards. Those standards were never lowered. What they were was put into the proper context. So the SAT and the ACT, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very biased. Okay? It is biased by race. It is biased by finances especially. So what basically having race-conscious admissions or affirmative action allowed you to do was to say, this test is one of several factors that we're going to put in its proper context, but we're not going to say that it is the end-all, be-all for your admissions. So just because you had one good Saturday, because that's all it really is one good Saturday out of your life, does not necessarily dictate that now you get the keys to the kingdom and everybody else gets to be left out. Instead, it said we're going to put that one Saturday in its proper context and every other thing in its proper context. And now you need to all rise to the occasion the way that Black people have been doing since their inception in this country. Thank you for coming to the barbershop.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Alicia.
You're the admission pro, and I understand.
No, but I think everybody here is a pro. So, Alicia, when you hear, because I heard this growing up and also in my practice, when you hear, oh, you just got in because you're Black and they lowered the standards for you. Oh, Brandon, you can jump in after Alicia, but thoughts that you have. And what do you feel like it does to our Black students as they're going through this process to constantly be working hard and then constantly having that work diminish?
Yeah, so I think that to the core, it's those statements and those beliefs are anti-Black. I think that Black folks are constantly scrutinized, evaluated in the terms of our group, right? So we can't just be an individual. We have to be a part of the collective. So we are viewed as less than, we are viewed as unintelligent. I think some of the original beliefs and myths about Black folks since the earliest days of this country are still very much pervasive in people's belief systems and their conversations at home, things that they hear from their own communities that's perpetuated through the media or through our politicians and all sorts of our students get these messages from everywhere. All of our students, Black, white, Asian, all of us get these same messages. And so for Black students who have their own experiences and see intellect in their family and in their own studies, and see joyfulness and goodness in their homes and in their communities, it can be demoralizing for sure. But I think that it can also be really confusing. And so, some students that I've spoken to over the past 2 cycles have really questioned whether or not they are going to be seen for their achievements and seen for what they contribute to our school community, because they're so accustomed to being marginalized. They're so accustomed to those anti-Black sentiments. And so, it takes a lot of work on our part as the adults, as the professionals, to really make sure that our students feel seen and feel heard. I encourage our students' families to use this process as, just one point in their journey where you can affirm their good work in schools and their good work in their extracurriculars and all of these sorts of things, because we exist in such a cruel society that really, out of all the folks who are here, will single out Black folks in particular to constantly dehumanize. And so it shows up in our systems, it shows up in curriculum, it shows up everywhere. And so I think educators have a special role, and college admission folks, higher ed has a really special role in really pointing that out and really exposing it for what it is. It's just anti-Blackness.
Brandon, I see you shaking your head. I know you have something to say as well.
Completely and totally agree with everything that was just said. And the biggest thing that's also anti-Black is actually look at the statistics related to who the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action have been. The biggest beneficiary of affirmative action is white women. White women. And on top of that, other groups have also benefited from affirmative action as well. Our AAPI community has also definitely been big beneficiaries of affirmative action, despite the narrative that has been put out there, because there is even diversity amongst the diversity of the AAPI community. So being Chinese American is very different than being Vietnamese, than being Korean. And we would act affirmatively towards those particular populations because they were not represented in higher education in the same rates as other populations. So that's the reason for why I tell people, you got to look within that. You got to look within that to see that it was benefiting a whole lot of people, even more so than it was benefiting African American and Black people. But we got labeled as that by being the easy scapegoats, when first off, we're not the biggest part of the population in this country, period, or in higher ed, period. And then when we get there, you're still trying to block us by having access to the resources and things of that nature that we need to persist in order to get through to graduation. But you're just mad at the fact that we got there. Let alone, we still are not getting all the things that we need to get through there. And so I tell people, you got to look deeper in that. And on top of that, if you're going to be mad at the right people. And it ain't us.
And also Black students get rejected. I think that is something I try to explain to people all the time. Like, I have a kid that got into Harvard. She also did not get into this school, this school, this school, and this school. Yes, I have a kid that got into Yale. She also got rejected from this place, and this place. One of the things that's interesting to me, though, is this perception in college admissions that everything is hyper competitive. So I'm going to go to my admissions pro. It's super competitive. You have to take every AP. And in my community, we have a diverse community, but in the AP classrooms, we're not seeing the same diversity. So a lot of the times it did feel like if I entered an IB or AP classroom, I was being divorced from my community, removed from my community. And then there was disparaging remarks about the gen ed kids as opposed to the IB and AP kids. So can you talk about the importance of rigor, the perception of competitiveness, and anything else you feel like throwing in the pot?
Let's get into it. Let's start with I love exactly what Alicia and Brandon have already said when it comes into whiteness has been the standard, right? Like we have set, the standard has been set to be Eurocentric, and every barrier has been made to keep anything that is not that out. So when Brandon's talking about the pieces like an SAT and ACT, a test, that is created first to keep out those of different religions, and then, oh, let's use it to keep out our Black and brown students, right? And so like historically, these things are set up in ways and barriers are set up specific to Black and brown communities. Within that, and to your question, Jen, it's like this idea that rigor is coded language, right? It's like grit. You have to go through the traumas and tribulations that I have had and or made for myself to make this a part of what competitive is, or the definition of doing better, right? Because we all know the default from our homes and experiences have been, you have to be twice as good to get just as much. Not an excellence, right? Not the fact that there isn't a Black abundance, right, in that community that comes into play, but that it's not a matter of just reaching the default, right? So when it comes into that AP, IB, those rigorous courseworks, it's a matter of another barrier. They're being withheld. You think of calculus, math as a stepping stone, right? Every college and or university is, oh, you have not succeeded unless you have taken the highest math possible. Even mathematicians in colleges are telling us, take an applicable math, like statistics, like a data science, right? Go into those fields within that, and then take calculus as a part of your college curriculum. And so for Black students, having that barrier, it's already limiting access. And so there's a additional context that us on the higher ed college admissions side that we have to take into play, right? So when we're thinking of Black and brown students, we use technology, if you will. We're going to say College Board's landscape, which is an inequitable piece and or tool itself, and the master's tools will not save us. But it is a tool that is used on this side of the desk to help contextualize the idea that, did a student have access to these things? Was their neighborhood and or school connected to being able to get to calculus, to get to extracurricular activities, to get to AP and IB courses, or did they have to take dual credit to challenge themselves? And then why is that minimized in our review? And so I think that that's on the college side, more of the issue is how we teach how to read a file and or read students' backgrounds. It's missing that context in that they may not have had access to these things. And more often than not, it may be that they are kept from that access to those things when it comes into Black and brown students in that school, right? Or in that school district even. Like, okay, no, you go take the vocational things, go take the community college credits, because we have reserved this to our top echelon students. You have to be at a specific ranking to take AP. You have to be at a specific ranking to get IB. And that's the problem for on our end in higher ed, is that we are missing that context when we look at this information. And so that then becomes a burden of a student to recognize it, or the burden of a college counselor to point it out. And that's an inequitable practice. And so those tools, like a landscape, like the training that we could give, and or dare I say, using some level of a DEI critical lens will help us to better understand what competitive or how competitive is defined for us as an institution, right? Because it may look different for the kid who took 8 APs because they had access to them versus the one who had taken all honors courses because that's what they had access to. And they achieved within those courses. And so on the higher ed side, that's how we're defining and/or contextualizing them, because we don't have all the information without the knowledge being fed to us. And/or we're not trained appropriately to be looking for that information.
Thank you, Sean. That was really good. Good job, man. And Alicia, I want to talk about on the school side, because one of the things that, as somebody who's worked in a public school before, I saw students, and then also worked as an SAT and ACT prep, I would see students get their score back and be like, oh, I guess I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Or they would find out, oh, everybody else was recommended for this math, but nobody even told me that there was an option to take this math. What are the ways that schools create barriers that parents need to know about? And what are the things that we can do to affirm our students and make them recognize that there is actually a college out there looking for them? And maybe it shouldn't be the goal to go to a college that's basing their reviews or their applications in inequity.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably spend the next hour, right, going through all of the factors that contribute to those scenarios that you described, Jen. And I think sometimes I have to pull myself away from thinking about this too much, because it really makes me angry because I see, and I have seen throughout my career, how schools and the people within schools really keep students away from opportunities. And sometimes it's unintentional, sometimes it's intentional. Either way, the impact can be incredibly devastating. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen it at work. So I think there are a number of levels. So I kind of think about things sort of like the systemic level, how the school has certain policies and practices that students have to adhere to, right? So I've worked in a few different schools at this point. Some schools have policy around AP and honors courses and who can take them and what that looks like. Some schools have a process where students have to get recommended to a course by a particular teacher in a particular subject. And so then what does that mean for the student who didn't necessarily get along with that teacher, because everybody doesn't get along with everybody else, or the student who got a 79.999% in the class, right, and didn't reach that 80% threshold, or whatever that looks like. So there are the processes that happen and the policies that happen within schools that I think educators need to audit. Educators need to think about. I really appreciate Sean's offering of this sort of critical eye at our procedures and who they impact, and if there are trends in who they impact negatively. I think it can be tough for parents and guardians to advocate. For many reasons. People are busy, people trust schools sometimes, people, assume that the teachers are going to have best interest. That doesn't always happen. And, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but educators, teachers, principals, directors, college counselors have bias. And sometimes their bias gets in the way of really, really good, thorough counseling for students. I've heard it from colleagues, some of their ideas about historically Black universities, some of their ideas about students with a 2.3, right? I hear these conversations in the many different associations and networks I'm a part of. And so I think on an individual level, for the individuals working in schools, there really needs to be ongoing long-term self-work about what people believe and how their beliefs shape the lives of students, right? Students are with us more than they're with anybody else throughout the school year. And so if you believe that an undocumented Mexican girl doesn't belong in an AP Stats course, then you're not going to recommend her for that. And you're not going to make sure that in 9th grade, she's on the track to take certain courses. You're not going to say, hey, come into my office. Like, I really want to make sure that you understand what this process is. You're not going to do that if you don't think that certain students don't belong in college, or that certain students won't make it in college. So I think that there's certainly the individual level that really needs to be figured out. Administrators, parents, and guardians advocating for that, students advocating for what they want and what they need. And then I also think there's the systemic level that needs constant reworking too.
One thing I've been toying with is this idea that as a Black woman, but as a Black person in general, we don't get the benefit of the doubt a lot. So it's okay for somebody to go into AP and they fail and then they just move back, but it's not okay for me to go into AP and fail and go back. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for coming from Brandon and Sean and Alicia is the idea of focusing on the context that you need for the application rather than focusing on the narrative that you're trying to sell. And Brandon, you're kind of an expert on what context is missing. What should parents do if as they see the barriers coming up, what should they do to prepare their students and articulate that in the application in a way that makes sense, but doesn't feel like necessarily an excuse? It's just, this exists, this happened, and this is how I dealt with it.
Well, a couple of things before I get to that amazing question, because first and foremost, to listeners of this, I hope you're appreciating all this wonderful goodness that you are getting from all these amazing people, because these are the conversations that we have and need to have and the information that you need to know. So I want to just put some appreciation with that. But two, I want to put a little bit more context before I get to the importance of this topic. There are 6,000 colleges and universities in this country. 6,000. How many of them are considered to be highly selective? Only 50 to 60. Put that into context for a moment there, right? That 6,000 colleges and universities exist out there for the purposes of educating you. But too often we allow 50 to 60 to dictate how we perceive education and how we perceive what is good, what is bad, and things of that nature. Because I often ask people, who came and told you that an HBCU wasn't good? Honestly, think about that. Who told you that the HBC wasn't good?
Karen.
Thank you. Karen, true.
And not just Karen, because there are people in our communities that will say that's for them, that's not for you.
Exactly. And so that's why I want us to think about that context once again, because that's so important about thinking, okay, why do I believe that this is not going to be something that serves me? And instead, I have to shrink myself to fit this instead of going to the place that's going to make me rise and is going to accept me as I am. Because trust me, there are so many places that are going to do just that. And this is where the context part comes in. Because once again, every single one of us is in a different context. So when you go to your school, as was already previously mentioned, your school may have an IB program, it may have an AP program, it may have only honors, right? And so you cannot be held against what you don't have access to. And then on top of that, even if you, let's say, have access to a community college, how far does it take you to get to that community college if you don't have the transportation? How far does it take you to get to that summer program if it is in the next state over, let alone not even in your immediate area? So all those things are a part of the context that is so important for us to have. And that's part of the reason for why it's so important that admission offices invest in your admission officers to actually go out and recruit. And when they go out and recruit, they're not recruiting only in the same schools, that they need to go around the entire city to really get a sense of what is going on. That's so to my admission folk who are watching, when you get done with your recruitment visits, do not go back to your room or go chill at the bar. No, this is when you go out into the community to see what is going on. What do people have access to? Because when you have that context, it makes it so much easier when you go back to your admission office and say, you think this kid has easy access to be able to go here? Let me tell you something. The nearest bus stop is an hour by walk. How they
even in my community, it is very easy to do IB humanities.
Mm-hmm.
So anything humanities related, history, sociology, any of the psychology, it's very easy to get into those.
Right.
But math and science, I didn't even realize this as somebody who was doing a lot of IB classes, how we were discouraged from taking those classes because we weren't perfect. And I think one of the things that I notice when I'm working with Black students in particular, and I work with students from all races, but with Black students in particular, it's like we think, oh, well, I'm not qualified because I didn't do every single component and I don't want to take the risk of being told that I'm not good enough, right? When they realize it was okay for you to go into an AP calculus class if you're a humanities major and get like a B. It's okay to go into that class and struggle and have failure. And I think one of the things that benefited me is that we had a very diverse IB program where they were pushing for that diversity, and they encouraged us to just make sure that we are in situations where we could fail and understand that it was going to prepare us for college if we failed now as opposed to failing later, right?
Exactly. And also the concept of what is quote unquote failure, because again, it's a very different situation if you are really super challenging yourself in that IB curriculum and let's say making a C versus if you're, doing the same thing, but maybe the level's a little different. Because if you demonstrate, hey, you can make that C and it's at that super high level, that means that when it's at that regular level, you probably still going to be making an A or something. So I don't consider that to be a failure. I consider that to be you challenge yourself. You saw what the challenge is, but there's a lot behind that challenge on top of it. Because, like you said, the other context is, well, what are you telling me that you want to study? It's one thing when you're telling me that you want to go into like a humanities, social sciences based subject, but you still taking that physics class and making a C. That means you can come to my super selective university that thinks that everything's at this huge level and still be great at doing the general requirements that you need to do, because it shows you're not shying away from that challenge. But then when you go into that English class, you're going to rock everyone out with the perspective you're going to bring. So that's the reason for why the context is important. But the way that you demonstrate this, especially in the application, utilize every opportunity to talk about it. So that additional information section, that's your new best friend. Literally,
listen, the additional information,
best friend.
That is where my best work comes in.
I like this. Don't you apologize about one thing that you put in there, because it is not an excuse. It is, look, these things did give me the ability to tell you some things. I need you to understand some things to understand this. So let me tell you some things. Okay, I wanted to take that advanced placement class. They wouldn't let me take that advanced placement class because it's done by a recommendation from a teacher who did like the fact that I knew what I was talking about, but wasn't going to give me the ability to say it in my language. I wanted to take that AP class, but then they had this thing called tracking where I couldn't get tracked because in ninth grade, they saw me as the little black brown girl who was good at science, but they were like, you ain't going to go into pre-AP. You go over here to algebra 8. That doesn't get you to the calculus. And I was like, I need to get to the calculus, but they're like, you ain't tracked that way. That's the thing, is that this is where the whole central thing of what we're doing here is about empowering you. I am telling you, every single one of us here is giving you permission. The full 100% permission. Say your truth and say it as a fact. Okay,
And
that's where the difference is that you ain't got to say, "Oh, it's because boo." It's just a fact.
no,
Here's the fact. Boom.
and document. Like that's the thing. As a lawyer, I think that is the most valuable thing that I learned. And I am so glad. I remember the classroom and everything. I'm not going to call it the teacher, but she said, A's speak for themselves. C's, if you earn that C, that's where you need your letter of recommendation. And my letter of recommendation was from my chemistry teacher. And he's like, let me tell you, she could have failed. She could have failed this class, but she relentlessly and every day after school. So if your student is staying after school, or if your student is not able to get into class and they take a class at a community college, document that process, but don't also allow a school to define the opportunities that your students are going to get. Sean, I see you nodding. Let's talk about
because y'all are spitting fire out here. I can't stop you. Let that mother burn. Like, look, come on.
Exactly.
Anything else without excuses or anything? Is there a point where you go too far in the anything else? And I feel like everything in college admissions is focused so much on the narrative of like the essay and da. But on the other side of the table, I just remember the first time somebody put a Common App preview in front of my face, I was like, I'm not reading all of this. There's no, okay, he's a good kid, got it. Moving on. So how do you add context without adding excuses? And why do you think there's such a disconnect in the admissions world from narrative on the student side to context on the other side of the desk?
I think it's because we're using the admissions process as identity formation for a student. Like we are asking them to know themselves best at 17, 18 and utilize that because they are fighting fear. Like students are fighting fear as they do this process. Like this is a courageous act. And so the fact that we are asking for you to advocate and we are asking for you to initiate these aspects that you may not have tried before, and it's a continued ask, and that's what's creating this anxiety. And so like what we need to be doing and/or ways that we can combat that on this higher ed end. And as a student, I think Brandon already said it, like you have to advocate. Jen, you said it, use that additional information box, document, right? It's not a matter of you referencing a issue and or a pathway or a concern on your application as a whining moment, right? Like this is you stating a fact, like Brandon said, like you are documenting something that occurred simply, right? And so I am just reiterating exactly what Brandon has already referenced. On this higher ed side, the way we see that, it helps us to better understand that you are willing and ready to advocate for yourself, right? We're not looking at, and let me backtrack for a minute too, is like, that's my bias, right? I'm reading it with this lens that there is no issue when you say that. Not every single admissions counselor is doing that. And I'll say broadly, every admissions counselor is reading a file between 6 to 8 minutes. Okay. And so that 6 to 8 minutes is going to be the quickest scan in that additional information to reference that, oh, this kid sounds whiny. This kid is stating a fact. It comes like this. Okay. And so what I try to, or would like to dispel is that you are stating something that is crucial to how you will move forward, right? It's not a matter of, oh, this is what kept me stagnant now. It is a matter of, I am outlining what has occurred for me today, and this is what I'm doing as I move into the next, right? My now is this, my next is that. All right.
Yeah.
And so that's something we catch in 6 to 8 minutes, right? Or we have to, because that's how many applications we have coming in. That's the anxiety on this side of the desk. But that's not your fault. Okay. And so this process will attempt to tell you that it is your fault, and it is not. It is not your fault for the anxiety that comes from the push of having to explain yourself or feeling like you have to explain yourself, right? I think many of us have said this in some way or facet before, right? None of us dream of work, right? We don't have a dream job, and neither should you have a dream college, right? Yes, education is important. Yes, that is a faculty to get you there. And you do not have to tie yourself to this idea that everything you put in these boxes of additional information, the context clues that you leave in your application or transcripts and extracurricular activities, are who you are, right? It is not, right? Not at all in that facet. And I pulled up a quote from American Fiction. If you haven't seen that movie, go see that movie. Right? Sintara, Issa Rae's character, in that movie said, potential is what people see when they think what's in front of them isn't good enough. For every student who's listening, for every admissions professional who's on here, all right, I want you to think about that context next time you're using potential, right? Like when you reference that as a part of your additional information, or you're stating it as it relates to what you're doing for your future, it is that you are affirming and or recognizing it, not that you are not good enough. I don't know if that answers your question, Jill.
It does. Alicia, one of the things that I know you know is we let students get sucked into this process where we make them the experts and give them no information about college, but now they're supposed to pick their dream school and their reach school and their, what's the, because I banned it from our vocabulary. I can't even think of the bottom tier anymore. Does anybody remember that?
Safety. I know.
Okay, let me start there and I'll come back to you, Alicia. Listen, do not let your kids have a safety school. Like this idea or a concept. Every school on that list should be a school that they're excited to go to. If they are not excited to go to that school, they should not be applying to that school. You should find value in every single school. And the way that I've done this with my students is I sit them down and I say, write 5 adults that you respect, not celebrities. And they'll be like, okay, they write 5 adults in their community or whatever that they respect. I'm like, okay, now you could do celebrities, you could do public figures, write them down. Where did they go to college? You don't know. I went to a doctor today. He went to Rutgers and then graduated from Cornell. And all I thought was, Cornell? I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. But he was like, oh, it was great, because that is the type of student that Cornell was looking for. So Alicia, how do you get the students away from the idea of, I have to have this dream college and this dream life and this new persona and this new identity, and especially in the context after the Supreme Court, which we haven't even mentioned, but we're going to get to this, in the context of the Supreme Court of, these are the colleges that are good, and these are the colleges that are ranked high, and these are the colleges that I deserve to go to, and I can't look below this level, and if I go here, it's a disappointment. How do you get them out of that mindset and into a mindset where they recognize this is just a choice, and it's not, while it's going to have some impact, it's not going to dictate your entire life?
Right, right. Oh, many ways. And I hope there are college counselors and high school counselors tuning in, because I'm constantly drawing from the expertise of my colleagues. I'm trying different things in my classroom lessons. So a few things I'll mention. And, it's important for college counselors, high school counselors to make sure that they're getting in front of students regularly. Like we have to we have to have contact, and we have to be having these conversations with each other ongoing, because there's so much noise. There's so much noise in their homes, in, the media, in, on social media, and, all of the kids who are only showing the TikTok congratulations and, sitting in front of the computer and, all the dramatics. It's so dramatic. So we have to counter some of that. And so one of the most important things that I think that helps in that work is really having trusting relationships with students. My students, for the most part, not everyone, but for the most part, my students trust me. And they trust that I'm going to be honest with them. And they trust that I'm an expertise in this work. And so if I'm telling them certain information, they generally believe me. And I think that that's really foundational to the different activities that I do in our classroom lessons. So one activity that I do, and I just did this activity today with 11th graders, I had them list all the colleges and universities that they could think of. So I gave them a certain amount of time. They were sectioned off in groups. They had like 4 different groups of like 5 students in each group. And I gave them paper, pen, and they wrote down, they spent like 2 minutes writing down all the colleges that they could think of. And then I added some more rules once they were done. I said, okay, you're going to, talk through the list. You're going to give me all the schools on your list, but you're only going to get a point for every school that no one else in this room mentions. So they started out with like a list of 50 schools, right? And by the time we got to the end of the activity, each group had like 7 or 8 schools at 7 or 8 points, right? For schools or universities that no one else mentioned. And so I have the students think about like the schools that they're familiar with. What is it about that school that is a good fit for them? I do this before we have any conversations about fit. What makes this school good for you? Give me a reason. Give me a compelling reason. Most of them can't, right? Because they haven't done the research. They know the name. They know, oh, my cousin went to Georgetown. It's a really great school. What is great about it? What is great about it for you? So we spend a whole semester going through all of that. And I also have them, writing, practicing their supplemental writing throughout the semester. And one of the questions that we use is the why us essay. But they write a short statement about why us. They pick a school, why us. But then you have to write a supplementary piece. Why not? Why not us? What is it about this institution that actually might not be great for you, that actually might not have what you need or what you're looking for in a particular experience? And so that they're able to see institutions for what they are. They're institutions that have a certain purpose that's, in some instances may cause harm to the communities that they're situated in. They might offer really great programs for students. They might offer programs that are subpar for what you want to study, right? Like, so getting them to think more critically about this decision, about these institutions. Honestly, like at the end of the day, I tell my students, I know you think I should care where you go. Like I kind of don't, but it's because I know that you're awesome and you're great and you're thoughtful and you're, intentional about the things that you study. So I know you're going to be phenomenal wherever you go. And I know that most students who go to college go to the school that's closest to them, the school that they can afford. And that's that, right? And they move on with their lives. So I let them know that I genuinely care more about the type of person that they're becoming and the kind of impact that they want to have in their communities and on other people. And college is one part of that whole journey. And I think for the most part, they believe me. Because I see it in some of the outcomes. I see it in some of the schools that they are, deciding to apply to. And some students will stop in my office and they'll say, nobody in my class knows about, a particular school that none of them have heard of, but I really like it. So that's going to be top of my list. And I'm like, yes, that's it. That's it right there. So those are just a couple of ideas that I have.
I love that. I love the why not. I also have a list of dumb alumni from the colleges. So I'll be like, You know, so one thing I'll do is if I find out somebody who I made a dumb decision in my mind, I'll be like, what college did they go to? Harvard? Okay, perfect, right? Because then we know there are dumb people that go there. Do you want to be hanging out in the classroom with that? But as somebody who has sent their students to some of the the Ivies and the selectives, and there are times I wish I had gone back and said, this is a good school, but this is not a good school for this student. And the trauma that they're going to endure over the next 4 years. Like, we can talk about return on investment. And I think I was at a presentation with Anthony Jack, who did The Privileged Poor. And he said, but we do know that return on investment here. And I said to him after the event, but what if the return on investment, we subtract the trauma and the therapy and the imposter syndrome and all of that, and then we look at where they could have been if they were in a healthier environment? Just because a school is number one on the top of the U.S. News and World Report or some ranking does not mean that is a good school for you, right? And I wish that in my earlier years, I had been more thoughtful about, is this actually the environment that's right for you? Brandon, how do we get around the fact that a lot of times we see that our students are being dumped on, right? And sometimes well-meaning people will come in and say, hey, that school's not for you. But it's interpreted as, you're a hater, you don't want to see me win, and you're trying to hold me back. How do we sift through advice, and how do we maintain a level of honesty with ourselves, but also be able to say, okay, this is a piece of information, maybe I need to evaluate it?
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple of things. First off, based off of what you just say, Jen, I'm amazed people still look at the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay, well, the University of Pennsylvania came up today.
Just saying.
It came up today. It did come up today.
And to go along with that, the thing that I always tell students is this. Michelle Obama has an amazing story in the book Becoming, in which she details, and I think it should be required reading for all of us who work in this profession, because it really shows what can happen with the words that we say to students. Because if Michelle Obama did not have enough security in herself, and also did not come from a family that instilled security in her, she would have missed out on Princeton, and that could have had its own wonderful trickle-down effect on our country, right? But thankfully, she didn't allow that to happen. So the same thing happens now for us when we work with students. And I always tell students this. You have to define what goodness is for you. The rankings and all that, that's someone else's measure. And on top of that, you need to look behind, well, what is actually a part of that measure? Because what many people don't realize, U.S. News and World Report, they're using inputs as part of those rankings, as in what are people coming in with, meaning coming in with their SAT score, coming in with the amount of people that they're rejecting being a part of that. They're not measuring their outcomes, being how happy were these people with their experience? Did they feel that they grew in knowledge and things of that nature? They're not including any of that, right? Exactly. Inequity in, inequity out. Exactly. Thank you. But I'm like, you got to think about that. So when it comes to you having that list, that's what it is. It is your reasons, what you're going to go, why you're going to go. Because mama and daddy, more than likely, they already went and got educated. Grandma and granddad, they like, we've been there, done that. This has got to be about you. So for me, that's the first and foremost thing, has got to be, okay, what are you wanting to get out of this experience? Start from there. Because if you're someone who's going to tell me, I want to go here because it's about getting a good job and getting this, I'm like, you can literally do that with every education that you get, because it's about what are you doing with that education. So kind of let's go a little bit past that. And so that's also, I think, a part of the work that we do is is asking students these questions and also empowering them once again to say, you get to answer this. And it doesn't have to sound pretty. It doesn't have to sound like what anyone else says. So, for example, I had a student who I work with who literally was like, look, I want to go and have a good time. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's start with that. What does having a good time look like for you? For him,
and she said euphoria.
Right? Now, if you told me that, I'm going to have some other questions for you, and I will become the Coleman Domingo character in there to get you correct. But to also then say, now, how does this look in a constructive way? Okay. Does this mean you're going and nerding out with your fellow friends in this kind of way, right? Does it mean for you being a part of a community that looks very much like you, or that maybe doesn't look like you, but you go find something else? That's the kind of basis, because I'm like this, you're actually in class, not a lot when you're in college. You are outside of class. You got to deal with life outside of that. So for that, we got to think about where you're going to go, where you're going to feel that you can have a full life in this. Meaning it's going to give you those other experiences that you want outside of the classroom. So you may be on the brink of thinking about that thing that you are nerdy about. You may be on the brink of that thing that you want to create. What's going to be the place that's going to foster that? So
right. And I think a lot of people,
we have to start with, don't think about the ranking. Okay. Take that completely out. This is once again about, this is the fun part about this experience. I think for most of us is what we say is the fun part about doing this work. We're literally helping you transition into, you get to make the decisions. So as part of that, you also get to freely say, well, what do I want out of this environment? And is it going to provide what I really, truly want? And then being okay with having the university make them answer those questions. Do you have this? What kind of environment is this? And I'm like, you freely get to ask that question. And if you like their answer, it's a university you keep looking into. If it's a university that ain't got a good answer, well, you kind of could think about that. But once again, you ultimately decide, what do I do with this information? Do I keep going because I find other things? And also, last thing, because I know I'm going all over the place.
We love it.
Multiple sources. Okay. There's not one end all be all. So please do not just think because these people are saying something, this means this, or these people are saying something, this means this. What's big thing? Because it was something I dealt with a little earlier today. Had a student who literally came to me and was like, I'm taking off Johns Hopkins. And I'm like, why? I heard it was dangerous. What makes you think Johns Hopkins is dangerous? They're like, oh, it's in Baltimore. What is that coming from? And I went into this whole thing about that's anti-Blackness. So I'm like this, you got to look into that for yourself. You would have went off and just thought, oh, this is dangerous. But I'm like, that's because they're making it seem like Black people are dangerous. So even with all those other kinds of things, that's why I'm like, it's so important that you evaluate and you look at where did you get that environment? I mean, where did you get that advice? And also what's the underpinning of that? What is it really honestly based off of? If you're just telling me it's someone's perception, once again, who gets to put their perceptions out there for the most part? Unfortunately, usually not us. And you need to think about that. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I think I love that because I was actually watching Dateline, as one does, and it was actually a white female student who went to the University of Utah, and they said, oh, they sold it on, this is a safe place, the safest place ever. But because they didn't have the proper police structure in place when she was being stalked, she was in danger. And it ended on Dateline, so we know what happened to her, right? But the other thing is, I'll have students say, oh, I heard this or I heard that. Listen, let me tell you something. Do not, I always tell the students, you can go on a tour, but the best part of a tour, walk around before you get on the tour, okay? Ask somebody, where's a bad dorm? Go to the financial aid office and see how these people are being treated with the problems that they're having. Go to the class register, go to those places. Go to the places where you have fun. The thing is, I find that a lot of students, and rightfully so, they want the glitz and the glam, and that's great, right? I'm somebody who loves that as well. But you don't need all these amenities to learn. You can have a crappy classroom and learn in it. You can have a crappy classroom with a great professor who's going to change your life. And I think a lot of times we intentionally put the 16 and 17-year-olds in the seat of like, pick it. We're not going to give you any information on how to pick it, but just pick it. You'll know. And they always tell you you're going to feel like you're home. Your home is your home. Virginia Tech was a great place. It was not my home. I can assure you of that. And there's a lot of times where these colleges, oh, this is the best college, but Gettysburg is a good college. It wasn't for the student who went there, you know?
Clark
so you
University,
figure out the outside, because I think a lot of, especially if you're going into debt for these decisions and you're like, well, I'm going to work all the time. Okay, so you're going to this prestigious university because you heard that they have the best networking opportunities and the best jobs and the best clubs, but you're going to be working a 40-hour shift. So you're not going to be able to do any of that. Mm-hmm. And the networks are all closed because these people have known each other since Jack and Jill.
Right.
What are we talking about? So
Clark Atlanta University has one of my favorite professors, Dr. Daniel Black. He is doing amazing things at that university, but he will be the first to tell you, hey, we need more wonderful resources, but we do the best with what we got. So I completely and totally agree with that. I just want to shout that out, that don't close it off because it don't look pretty. Okay. Do not
as long as your dorm doesn't have roaches, rats, asbestos. And you know what? If it does, maybe you can figure it out. But if it doesn't, keep it moving. Okay, let's talk real quickly, and we're going to wrap up, but real quickly about the Supreme Court decision. We know, everyone, one of our favorite phrases is blackness is not a monolith. And yet there are archetypes that we kind of rely on for these essays, for everything. The Supreme Court said, you know, race is problematic. Is essentially where they ended up. And I've had Black students come to me and say, can I talk about race? Can I not talk about race? Should I talk about race? Should I not talk about race? Should I talk about my identity? Well, I'm a Black suburbanite. And I even heard an expert say, nobody cares that you're a mixed girl in the suburbs. And I'm like, everybody can, like, you can have 5 lasagnas in front of you, but somebody brought the same lasagna and made it better than everybody else. So if that's part of your story, that's part of your story. But this idea that you have to stand out and you have to maybe adopt trauma, how do you all combat that? And anybody can just jump in who is ever feeling passionate. How do you combat that? And the idea that race is something that we should either exploit or hide.
I can jump in. Yeah. I've had similar conversations with students, and between the 4 of us, I can't imagine how many essays we've read and help students write. So I'm like, if you compare
I'm sorry, I had a trauma moment. Listen, I don't want to see another transition word or semicolon.
Therefore,
y'all don't know how to use semicolons, nor do you know how to use transition words. Please stop. Please stop. Please stop.
Bless their
Furthermore, goes nowhere in this essay.
Bless their hearts. So yeah, I mean, we've seen our share of students trying to figure out how to express themselves and share who they are with colleges and universities. And I think that it's tricky because on the one hand, you know, we want students to be authentic. We want them to just tell their story. We want them to be honest. We want them to be transparent. On the other hand, like, there are formulaic parts to some of this, right? So I never tell a student what to write about, but I just help them share their ideas and their personality in the best way that they can. And sometimes that is talking about identity. And I just had this conversation. I was at the People of Color Conference in Denver with some really amazing, wonderful independent school folks. And a friend of mine who was at a school outside of Philly had a presentation about letters and writing and how do we make sense of all this post the SCOTUS decision, to sort of mark out the race on the formal application. And it's tough because some educators don't know how to do it, right? Some educators don't know how to make sense of race and racism and race conscious admissions and identity. And some folks who are the helpers in these situations don't do a great job of figuring that out because we haven't had a ton of training. And so, then we're helping students also not only try to write about it, but try to make sense of it and understand it. I work with a number of biracial students who are like, well, I never really thought about what it was like growing up in this household and having, my Black family over here and my white family over here. And now you're asking me to do it at a time when they're going to tell me that I got in or not, right? It's high stakes in their eyes. And so I think, that I am fortunate to be pretty well versed in identity and, these sorts of, ways of thinking about racial identity and racial identity development. And so I'm able to help students not only process it in a way that feels like growth for them, but also convey it in a way that is, important to them. And some students I have who are Black on my caseload are like, I don't want to talk about this really at all. I'm not in the Black Student Union. I don't really participate in any social justice things. I'm not a part of Jack and Jill. I just kind of play, computer games and call it a day, which is also fine. So I think that, those are kind of just my unformed and informal ideas about it. But I think that the educators need to get a lot better at supporting students through however their development is unfolding.
Sean, what about you? What are you thinking?
I'm just sitting in my trauma now that Alicia.
It's very obvious that Alicia's getting a PhD. She's super
right.
smart.
Dr. Oglesby just was like,
I was giving you a segue.
You go ahead.
You have a way of saying things that are very complex in a very accessible way. And I appreciate that.
I just had to choose my race getting my license in the state of Texas. All right. So when we talk about
did you choose? Did you choose?
What I choose, I chose Black. Let's be real.
You chose Black.
My Black mother raised me. I am going to continue to identify in that way. Anyway, I want to start briefly on the opposite end because affirmative action and or its loss, I guess, affects colleges and universities a different way. So it said we can no longer use race on the application, right? We can no longer utilize that as a part of decision making in the admissions process. What it doesn't say and what interpretations become and or look like is exactly what Jenn talks about in there is a college looking for you, right? So if you are a Black and brown student, we are looking for you based on an SAT or ACT score you have opted in to tell us, right? Because that's where we might find information like that. And or as we've said throughout this, all four of us have referenced, the SAT, ACT has set a cadence for how Black and brown students will fit in specific bandwidths, right? And so that's a way and route that college and universities will use. We'll use vendor relationships to find Black and brown students. Beyond that, there is the idea that we can then see it on the outcomes end, right? So we've made the decision. So what next, right? And we could think about it from the racial wealth gaps as well, right? Socioeconomic status hasn't shifted in America in quite some time. And so we, again, can look at bandwidths to find students. The colleges that are doing it and are doing it well are those that are going to be intentional, right? So when we are an intentional institution or an intentional university, we are looking for students, Black and brown students, in the ways that still fit within the law and allow us to fit for how we want to achieve with you, for you, in that same aspect. Okay. Now, this is my SMU speak for a moment, right? As an institution that is sitting in Texas and has the stereotypes of eliminating DEI in universities and taking out affirmative action unto itself, eliminating words from websites. An institution like ours has been built around inclusive excellence, right? And so it's this idea that we are still intentional about how we are bringing in Black students as an accessible piece. And in addition to that, how we are serving them once they are there, right? Because the other aspect, I think Brandon talked about this was, and Alicia, I think you talked about it as well, is that when we go out to high schools and we go out into neighborhoods, we explore. We should, right? If we're doing it well, if we are being inclusive and accessible, then we are also referencing that, okay, we went to the private school right next door, independent school right next door. Let's go to the public school on the other side of the street, right? Let's go to the predominantly free lunch, Black and brown charter institution, right? And I mention that in a very stereotypical way because those are the bands that colleges start to consider and or use as a way to find you, all right? And so what I would like to say within the affirmative actions relinquishment, I guess, is that an intentional university is still looking for you, okay? An intentional institution is still looking for Black students, still finding Black and brown students. And they're doing it in a way because they want to be accessible for you, right? And that they will have the resources to do so. And if not, try to do that for you and or with you, all right? Not all of them will do that. Not all of them will be that, okay? They'll talk the big game. And as Jenn said, do some of that double tax, if you will, to get you there, right? So it's on your discernment and the support systems that you have around you to ensure that that piece fits you well, right? But otherwise, that affirmative actions work is one piece that has been removed, right? My former boss, Adrian Amador Odie, said it well. It's just one factor that has been removed. We still have action to take, right? And so that hasn't shifted, that hasn't changed. We will continue to pour ourselves in you and not let one drop fall. All right. Anyway.
Right. No, I think that Black students don't realize you are the prize. Like, you're going to be on their brochure. You're going to be the one they drag out. So you get to decide if you want to be a token, if you want to assimilate, if you don't want to assimilate, if you want to just be at an institution that affirms you and affirms who you are. But for me, one of the things I had to struggle with as a suburban Black girl is this idea, like, nobody gets to define Black for me. My mother is Black. My father is Black. So I am Black. And if I want to listen to, Britney Spears as a Black woman, I'm going to do that. And if I want to listen to Kendrick right after that, I'm also going to do that. So I think one of the things that concerns me when I am looking at essays and things like that, or even I was talking to Brandon before we started about little lies on the application, is like, what are we teaching our kids when we say, okay, let's embellish this a little bit, or let's pump this up, or let's lie about this, or let's force your teacher to give you a better grade. You will never know if you got in or this persona got in, and whether you need to continue this persona. So for me, thank God I was rejected, waitlisted, and then I don't think I turned in any forms, so then rejected from UVA, because once I got to Virginia Tech, I realized this is the place I was supposed to be, even though it's in the middle of mountains and there's a lot of cows here. There's a lot of cows here. Too many cows here. But I think I knew that I had done the work to get in. And so when somebody would say to me, oh, well, just because of affirmative action you got in, I would be like, yes, if you want to believe that, that's fine. I know that that's who I am. And I think people don't think down the line of the impact of creating a persona or a lie or forcing your kids to be in classes they don't like or things like that, and how it erodes at a student's sense of being. And they feel a need to continue to play this role and never really develop their true identity. Brandon, close us out. Close us out, Brandon.
As a fabulous suburban Black boy, I made it known you were going to know I was a fabulous suburban Black boy, because that's my biggest thing with this. Everyone, let's remember what that decision basically said is that you don't have an automatic checkbox that the colleges and universities can look at. That's all that changed. They made it very clear in Robert's decision that you can discuss race if it is important to you. And that's the key thing. It's important to you. Nobody checking, and no one's going to race check you. So that's why I tell my current students, if this is truly fundamentally important to you, we talking about it. And you don't got to quantify it. You don't got to do anything. You got to state it as what? A fact. That's the bottom line about all this, y'all, is that we are stating facts. We are stating facts about who we are. We're stating facts about our experiences. We're stating facts about why you are going to say yes. So as long as we are applying that, you're doing this the correct way. And then it's incumbent upon the university to make its decision. So the thing that you have to do is put you in that application. Long as you've done that, hit submit, let the process play itself out. If that place wants you, they're going to show you. How they going to show you? They're going to show you by that acceptance letter. They're going to show you by that financial aid package.
Show me the money.
By that scholarship that they want you. And if they don't show you, it ain't the place for you. But also, feel empowered to make them work for it. And when I mean make them work for it, I really mean that. It is okay to go back and say, you know what? Over here, they're showing me some love. Got love for you. I need to see a little bit more love to commit. You get the right to do that.
I deserve it all.
Yeah, I deserve
the whole thing. So that's the reason why that's my biggest thing here with y'all. Look, we ain't apologizing for nothing else. We ain't apologizing for nothing. So if I'm going to talk about my race, I'm talking about it because that is my right with this application. If you got a problem with it, you ain't the place for me.
It's a privilege to be rejected from the thing that you thought you wanted, but it was not at all. Because I think if anybody on this call could tell you, because everybody here, we all know each other personally, professionally, but who I am now does not read UVA undergrad. It was a mistake.
Like,
I didn't even know what I was doing. And I think that's the thing is like, I think a lot of times I'll have a student write out like, why this college? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, then why are we applying?
Exactly.
If we don't know that we shouldn't apply.
And the other thing, y'all, to the wonderful kids here, if it's about location and it's about prestige, that ain't good enough. Those are the two number one reasons that everyone tells us why we want to go. We already know prestigious. We already know we got a great location. It has got to be way more than that. And you have got to kind of understand that about yourself.
Totally agree. This application process is not a litmus test for how special you are. We can't do that. Not with
the parents. To the parents, this ain't about you either. This is not a referendum on your parenting. Okay. If kid did not get in, that does not mean you're a bad parent. Want to know that?
Yeah.
So I think we had a great question from someone. Keisha asked, how does this work with ED? That's the key thing. When
can we just start with ED is, I don't know why everybody loves ED, because why would I am the prize.
Correct.
So you want me to eliminate myself from consideration for everybody else and only focus on you. And then you don't, it's not like I sign this and you go, okay, we're done, let's go. Then you can tell me no, and then I have to start over.
And
I'm
that's
Keisha,
why
Keisha, I'm going to say this. I don't do ED. I'm not locking in because I'm going to negotiate everything. I'm negotiating financial aid. I'm negotiating the dorms. I'm negotiating everything. And if somebody else comes with a better offer, I would say the last 2 to 3 cycles, I have had students who've had massive lists, and they're like the ones that, got in here, boom, 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 good, and celebrate in their community. Everybody's jealous of them. But every time, Star Angel's the perfect example of this. We went to 20 colleges. Everyone, it just wasn't it. And then we stopped randomly at Roanoke College, and on the way down to Rhodes, on the way back from James Madison, and she was like, this is it. And we did that application that day. So I think for me, and this is just my personal gospel, ED is the sunken place. I would not. You have to value your kid more than you value the institution, and say, my child deserves to have options. And yes, if you say yes, there's this idea it's more competitive, you can get in a lot easier. No, for legacy students, sure. It's about who's applying early decision. But for me and mine, we're always looking at options, and you can always come off the list. You can be eliminated. Anybody else have thoughts on ED?
I'll just say this. For me, it literally is, you got so much love for this place because you have looked at it deeply that you are really ready to commit to marriage. But if you have that one inkling of cold feet, we ain't doing this.
Okay.
The only time I ever say ED is a benefit, it's mutual, because you are the prize, but you also feel, I want this so much. So that's when okay, cool.
I agree. I think it also comes into play with student athletes. So that's we can spend another hour and a half some other time talking about student athletes and early decision and their whole process.
And how some of us need to adopt the mindset of a student athlete in this process.
Yeah.
Well, I want to do a signing day like that for all of our students, okay?
Listen, I do it.
Yeah.
And Sean knows we'll do 300 balloons over here.
Right.
In 2 days. Sean, any last parting words? Everybody, how can people find you if they want to find you? Let's start with that, because TikTok may not exist, may exist, may not exist. Some of us have left X. Some of us have not adapted to Blue Sky. So if people want to find you or follow up with you, and of course you all are welcome back. We should do this more often, but if people want to find you, Alicia, where do they find you?
LinkedIn for sure. First and last name. I don't know that there are many other Alicia. There might be a couple, but I'm the Black one. So Alicia Oglesby on LinkedIn.
Sean?
This is a funny story. So LinkedIn as well. There is another Sean Whitten. He is also biracial, but Black presenting. So I'm the white presenting.
I reject that.
Sean E. Whitten is the Whitten you're looking for. So yeah, LinkedIn still. Please feel free to find me there and reach out.
Okay, Brandon.
So y'all can find me on LinkedIn at Brandon Mack, also on socials at the Brandon Mack. MACK. Don't leave out the K. Not related to Bernie Mac, even though I wish I was. And then also you can follow. You can also email me at Brandon@BMackStrategies.com.
And Brandon is taking clients. I will not be taking clients. So I suggest you follow. I will be doing events. I am not taking any more clients this cycle. And I hope to never have another client in my life. So what a great way to end this presentation. Not because my clients are great. Sorry. I have great clients this year. Clients are great. I am the problem. I realize that client work is not where my heart is. Community work is where my heart is. So thank you all so much. I'm going to end the stream. Stay on for a second, y'all. But if you have questions, please put them down. If you have ideas of things that we should be talking about, please put it down. All 4 of you are invited back anytime. Not in the morning, though, because I don't get up in the morning. But any other time, anytime after noon, you're invited back. And we will try to host these more often. And I love everything that we got to talk about. But actually, one last question before we go. A college that Black students overlook that you feel is a college worth mentioning? I'm gonna do 2. And they're all, actually, I'm going to do 3. I lie. And they're all going to be in Virginia. Yes, a recording will be available. Thank you, Allison, for asking that. I'm going to say, and it's all Virginia, so it's going to be Mary Washington, Hollins, with a great Black president. I mean, I watched her presentation. I almost cried. I was like, you know what? I actually do love my job, and I love this. And then Roanoke College has been great for our students, and probably one of the most, that Roanoke Valley area has some of the best affirming colleges and has a reputation that doesn't meet reality. Alicia, Brandon, Sean, anybody else?
So definitely want to shout out a couple of HBCUs that are favorites of mine personally. Morgan State University in Maryland and North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Alabama A&M too. Alabama A&M, on that hill, it's beautiful. Go ahead, Sean.
I'm going to shout out Prairie View A&M near Houston.
You know.
There go Panthers down there. And then if you all haven't heard, listeners, that is predominantly Black institutions. So they're not HBCUs, but they have a high population of Black and brown families. I'll say Chicago State University. They are on the come up. I think they might be Panthers as well. Green and white on that end. So those are my 2.
And what about the institution that you're repping?
Oh, SMU, absolutely. It's on the come
right
up.
Now?
But what'd you say?
Great football right now. Found that out. I was like,
right now, but I don't want to tie that you have to be into sports to be here.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt. Alumni networks are great. As somebody who went to a football school, and we use that term loosely at Virginia Tech. Yeah. Alicia, one of your favorites?
So I would say for predominantly white institutions, a little unknown gem is Ursinus College. It's not too far from Penn State. I've had some Black students attend that school and some friends who attended that school and had a really positive experience. In terms of HBCUs, I think an also unknown gem is Dillard University in New Orleans.
Yes.
Yeah, they do some great STEM work, and they're just a really enriching, empowering place to be.
If you want your kid to graduate in STEM, send them to an HBCU. If you want them to drop out and then get a humanities degree while you're paying $50,000, send them to a PWI. Okay? Because every single time, the amount of kids, I mean, Alabama A&M, I sent a kid 2 years ago, the kid already has a job. He's like, yeah, I don't know what to do now because I already have my job and, I'm already working. So I guess I have to technically finish my credits, but I mean, I already know. I'm like, wow, I didn't, the schools that you never hear from the kids again. Yes. What was the college that you recommended, Alicia?
Yes, Dillard University in New Orleans and Ursinus College.
Can you spell that?
Yeah, sure. URSIN as in Nancy, US.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to end the stream and then talk to these lovely people. Thank you all for coming out, and goodbye.